There's a shift happening in global power, a shift so massive that when it reaches its breaking point, the world order we've lived under for 80 years will end overnight. For the first time since the fall of the Soviet Union, three major powers, China, Russia, and Iran, are aligning not by accident, not by convenience, but by shared purpose. And that purpose is simple: end American dominance. Individually, each of these nations is a serious threat. Together, they are something else. A new axis of power with military leverage across three continents. China dominates the Pacific. Russia dominace Eurasia. Iran dominates the Middle East. Three regions where U.S. influence is already under strain. Three fronts Washington cannot reinforce at once. Three adversaries that have learned one critical lesson from history. You don't defeat a superpower by fighting fair. You defeat it by forcing it to fight everywhere. The United States has spent decades dividing the world into separate problems. Russia is a European problem. Iran is a Middle East problem. China is an Asia-Pacific problem. But that belief is now outdated. Dangerously outdated. Because these three powers are no longer acting alone. Russia sells oil to China. China sends tech to Iran. Iran supplies drones to Russia. All three share intelligence, finance, and weapons development. All three test U.S. resolve from different directions at the same time. The partnership is not ideological, it is strategic. It is built on one foundational truth. America can't stop them all. Washington's foreign policy is still structured for a world that doesn't exist anymore, a world where the U.S. decides the rules and everyone else reacts. But that world ended the moment these three powers realized something the Pentagon doesn't want to admit. The United States, after Afghanistan, is no longer feared like before. China pushed warships across the Taiwan Strait. Russia invaded Ukraine again without hesitation. Iran struck American assets in the Middle East through proxies without consequence. Each test was probing the same weakness, and each test pushed these powers closer together. This isn't a Cold War. This isn't a temporary alignment. This is the birth of a rival system, one designed to break the United States through simultaneous pressure on every front that matters. This is the new axis. And the question now isn't whether they will strike together, it's when, for decades, China studied the United States, not to admire it, not to imitate it, but to defeat it. Beijing watched how America fought in Iraq, in Kosovo, in the Gulf. It saw the same strategy every time. Air dominance, carrier dominance, technology dominance. So China built a military designed for one purpose: to destroy the American way of war. And they did it without rushing. No overstretch. No bragging. No showmanship. They bided their time and then revealed what they had built. Today, the People's Liberation Army Navy is the largest navy on Earth, more ships than the U.S. Navy. China has created an arsenal of carrier-killer missiles DF-21D and DF-26 weapons specifically engineered to sink American supercarriers from over 1,500 miles away. Because China understands a brutal truth, sink one U.S. carrier, and the entire myth of American naval dominance collapses. This is why the Pacific is no longer an ocean of U.S. control. It is a battleground of uncertainty. China now surrounds Taiwan with warplanes daily. Chinese submarines shadow U.S. destroyers. Artificial islands have become forward missile bases. Hypersonic weapons, the kind the U.S. still can't reliably shoot down, are operational. And Beijing no longer hides its intentions. Control the first island chain. Push the U.S. Navy outside the Pacific. Reunify Taiwan by force if necessary. Become the new center of global power. China does not want a negotiation. It wants a replacement. The U.S. Navy leaves. China arrives. For 30 years, America assumed China needed it, needed the markets, the technology, the protection of U.S. influence. But China learned how to build its own tech, its own markets, its own alliances, and now it is exporting power in ways Washington never anticipated. Ports in the Middle East, military bases in Africa, naval presence expanding into the Indian Ocean, weapons and drones sold to U.S. allies. China is no longer rising. China has risen. And the only thing standing in its way is a U.S. military that is older, smaller, slower to adapt, and spread too thin. Beijing knows the United States cannot afford a Pacific war, but China can. That is why China is the core of this new axis, not because it needs Russia and Iran, but because they need China. Yet China cannot change the world order alone. That requires a partner with nuclear audacity and a willingness to go to war with the West. And that partner sits right next door to NATO. Russia should have collapsed into irrelevance after the Soviet Union fell. Its economy shrank. Its population declined. Its military rusted. The world assumed Russia was finished. Russia never agreed. Vladimir Putin rebuilt Russia not by copying the West, but by identifying the West's weaknesses and exploiting every single one. Europe depends on Russian energy. NATO depends on U.S. commitment. America depends on never being overstretched. Russia doesn't need to win a direct fight with the United States. It only needs to make the cost of U.S. involvement unbearable. That's exactly what Ukraine became, a strategic trap designed to exhaust American dominance, not Russian ambitions. For Russia, Ukraine is not a side conflict. It is the front line of a new world order. Every artillery shell the U.S. sends to Kyiv is one less for a Pacific war. Every dollar sacrificed for Ukraine is a dollar not spent deterring China. Every promise to defend NATO weakens the promise to defend Taiwan. Russia's strategy is simple: beat America through pressure, not through peace. The West believed sanctions would break Moscow. Instead, Moscow turned east toward China, toward India, toward Iran. Now Russia sells oil outside the dollar system. It buys technology through Beijing. It builds missiles with Iranian components. It trades energy for weapons, food, and political support. Russia no longer needs Western approval. But Western nations still need Russian resources. And on the battlefield, Russia has shown something the United States did not expect: a willingness to take massive casualties, a willingness to endure long war, a willingness to escalate when challenged, a dangerous willingness that Washington has not had since 1945. Russia is not fighting for influence. Russia is fighting for existence. That makes Russia the most unpredictable and most volatile member of this new axis. While China targets U.S. dominance in Asia, Russia stretches U.S. resolve in Europe. Two fronts, two commitments, one superpower forced to split attention. And Russia knows the math. If America divides its military, America loses its military edge. But there is one more player, the one always underestimated, the one that doesn't need aircraft carriers or supercomputers to break. U.S. strategy, the one that can set the entire Middle East on fire with a single decision. Iran. Iran doesn't have fifth-generation jets. It doesn't have aircraft carriers. It doesn't have the world's largest economy. And that's exactly why Washington underestimated it. Iran built a different kind of power. One, the U.S. Military is terrible at defeating. Asymmetric warfare. While America spends billions on one fighter jet, Iran spends a fraction of that to build drones, missiles, proxy militias deployed across the entire Middle East. Iran doesn't need to fight the U.S. directly. It has others to do that for it. Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, militias in Syria and Iraq, Islamic Jihad in Gaza. Each one is a fuse waiting for Iran to light it, and each can strike U.S. interests without Iran firing a shot. This is Tehran's strategy: turn every U.S. military presence into a target, and every oil route into a vulnerability. Iran doesn't need to defeat the U.S. Navy. All it needs to do is close the Strait of Hormuz for 72 hours. 1/3 of the world's oil supply passes through that narrow choke point. If the ships stop, global markets collapse. And when oil prices spike, everything else collapses with them. Iran has missile systems buried in mountains. It has drones that have already proven deadly in Ukraine. It has cyber units that can shut down infrastructure without firing a bullet. Most importantly, Iran is willing to absorb pain, sanctions, strikes, isolation to win a long war. That is something America learned the hard way. The U.S. can win battles. Iran can win endurance. Iran's presence in this new axis completes the map of U.S. vulnerability. China blocks the Pacific. Russia bleeds Europe. Iran ignites the Middle East. Three powers, three fronts. One overstretched superpower. Individually, the U.S. can handle any one of them. Together, it becomes the nightmare scenario the Pentagon doesn't want to discuss publicly: a multi-theater war that America cannot win quickly, and may not win at all. And here's the part that changes everything. China, Russia, and Iran are no longer acting independently. Their moves are coordinated, which means if one battlefield ignites, the others won't stay quiet. China, Russia, and Iran don't need a formal treaty. They don't need a NATO-style command structure. They only need a shared objective: force the United States to fight more wars than it can handle, And that coordination is already happening in three powerful ways. Military synchronization. Whenever the US focuses on a crisis in one region, another region heats up. Russia invades Ukraine. China sends jets across Taiwan's airspace. Iran escalates attacks through proxies. US Navy shifts to Pacific. Russia pressures the Baltics. Houthis strike shipping in the Red Sea. Every move is a test. Can America be everywhere at once? So far? No. Argib. Economic reinforcement. The West tries to isolate each country, but they shield each other. Russia sells oil to China and Iran. China provides tech and industrial support. Iran supplies drones and ammunition. Sanctions once divided them. Now sanctions bond them. The more the US tries to isolate one, the stronger the others become. CENTEU, information cyber warfare. These nations coordinate messaging and narratives. The US is declining. America won't defend its allies. Washington is unreliable. Cyber units operate in tandem. Russian hacks on NATO infrastructure. Chinese espionage on US defense systems. Iranian attacks on oil and transport networks. Their targets aren't random. They're chosen to overwhelm defenses simultaneously. The strategy is simple, but devastating. Stretch the United States until something breaks. Not in one huge war, but in a dozen simultaneous crises. The US military was built to project overwhelming power onto one battlefield. It was not built for a naval war in the Pacific, a ground war in Europe, a proxy war in the Middle East, cyber and space battles everywhere at once. Washington still talks about managing threats, as if threats operate on separate schedules. But China, Russia, and Iran are not waiting in line. They are coordinating their clocks. America can deter one. It can contain two. But three at the same time? History has already shown the answer. No superpower survives a three-front war. Every strategist in Washington knows this truth. If the new Axis makes a move, China will strike first. Not in Europe, not in the Middle East, but at the choke point of the 21st century, Taiwan. Why Taiwan? Because if China takes the island, it controls the Pacific's most critical sea lanes. It gains military reach against Japan and the Philippines. It cripples US credibility in Asia. And most importantly, it seizes the heart of global technology semiconductors. Taiwan isn't just a country. It is the brain of the modern world. Without Taiwanese chips, no French jets, no satellites, no AI systems, no advanced missiles, no modern economy. Control Taiwan, control the world's tech supply. That's why Beijing is preparing for war, not diplomacy. And here's the part that transforms a regional conflict into a global one. While the US Navy rushes to the Pacific to stop China, Russia sees its opening. Front, två ignitas, Europe. With America's carriers tied down near Taiwan, Russia pushes deeper into Ukraine or even tests NATO directly. Washington now has a choice. Save Europe or save Taiwan, because it cannot save both. Front #3 ignites. The Middle East. America's bases in Iraq, Syria, Bahrain, Qatar all become targets overnight. Iran's proxies launch rockets at US bases, drones at US warships, missile barrages at Israel and Gulf states. The Strait of Hormuz is threatened. Oil prices explode. The global economy collapses. This is the multi-front trap. China doesn't need Russia and Iran to win for it. It only needs them to make sure America loses everywhere else while China wins in Taiwan. Beijing's strategy is brutal and efficient. We take Taiwan while you're busy trying not to lose Europe and the Middle East. The US military would be divided, overstretched, and running out of ammunition faster than it can resupply. War game simulations already prove it. China gains air superiority. US loses ships early. American bases get overwhelmed. Taiwan falls, not in months, in weeks. This is not the future. This is a real scenario the Pentagon already fears. And Taiwan is only one possible spark. There is another one that could start the cascade even faster. And this time, Russia makes the first move. For the past 2 years, Washington has treated Ukraine like a contained crisis. A brutal war, yes, but a local one. Manageable, controlled, predictable. That assumption is a fantasy. Because if Russia decides Ukraine is not enough, if Moscow pushes into NATO territory, the entire US security system collapses overnight. Russia does not need to invade Paris, or Berlin. It only needs to test the thinnest, most vulnerable point. The Baltics, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, small states, small armies, a border with Russia that is nearly impossible to defend quickly. If Russian armored brigades cross that line, NATO faces the single most dangerous question in its existence. Does the United States go to war with a nuclear superpower? If the answer is yes, then US forces must redeploy to Europe instantly. Aircraft, armor, logistics, billions in weapons, everything the Pacific urgently needs vanishes. If the answer is no, then NATO collapses. Alles Panik. The entire US alliance network across the world snaps. Japan, South Korea, Taiwan would understand immediately. America won't come. And China would strike the moment that realization becomes global. Russia knows this pressure point well. It doesn't need to conquer Europe. It only needs to force America to make an impossible choice. Fight Russia or save Taiwan. Either decision is a US defeat. Because while Moscow ties down American power in Europe, Iran prepares the third punch. The Middle East erupts. US forces arrive in Europe. Iran activates every proxy at once. Rocket fire from Lebanon. Drone swarms over the Persian Gulf. Missiles aimed at Israel. US bases attacked in Iraq and Syria. Houthis block global shipping through the Red Sea. One command from Tehran. And the Middle East turns into a battlefield so chaotic that America bleeds resources faster than it can deploy them. Washington suddenly finds itself fighting a naval war in the Pacific, a ground war in Europe, a proxy and energy war in the Middle East. This is exactly what China, Russia, and Iran have planned. 3 wars, 3 fronts. One superpower stretched beyond its breaking point. Not even during World War II did the US military face simultaneous peer challenges this severe, and that was when industry was booming, recruitment surged, and logistics were unmatched. Today, recruitment is failing. Ammunition stockpiles are depleted. Equipment is aging. Allies are doubting. The timing is perfect for them, and Washington's worst nightmare is still ahead. What happens if the US starts losing? Superpowers don't collapse because they lose one battle. They collapse when the world sees them lose and decides they can be defeated. That moment changes everything, because deterrence is not built on weapons. Deterrence is built on fear. And fear disappears the moment weakness becomes undeniable. The first American defeat, it doesn't matter whether it happens when a US carrier is sunk near Taiwan, when Russia overruns a NATO border, when Iran shuts down Hormuz and markets crash. Whatever the trigger is, once it happens, the shift is immediate. Allies stop asking what America will do. They start asking what America can do, and suddenly the world realizes the answer: not enough, not everywhere, not anymore. The alliance network unravels. US power doesn't rely on domination, it relies on trust. If Japan believes America cannot stop China, Japan builds nuclear weapons. If Saudi Arabia believes America cannot secure the Gulf, Saudi joins China's security bloc. If Europe believes America cannot save NATO, Europe cuts deals with Russia. One failed commitment, every commitment is doubted. The alliance system collapses like dominoes. This has happened before. France, 1,940 allies ran for protection elsewhere. USSR 1,989 Eastern Europe revolted. Britain post World War II empire lost in less than a decade. The moment the guarantee breaks, global order breaks with it. The economic shockwave. The US dollar is powerful because the US military guarantees global trade. If that guarantee disappears, oil trades in yuan. Sanctions no longer work. Markets move away from the dollar. The economic empire that built American strength starts to unwind in real time. America turns inward. Once Washington realizes it cannot win everywhere, bases close. Foreign presence shrinks. The Navy retreats to home waters. Defense strategy changes from global leadership to survival. This is not a prediction. This is the stage 6 outcome of every empire. Loss of credibility, loss of allies. Loss of allies, loss of power projection, loss of power projection, loss of global influence. Rome didn't fall because barbarians stormed the gates. Rome fell when it withdrew behind its own walls. The United States doesn't need to be invaded to lose. It only needs to be ignored. The new Axis doesn't need to conquer America. They only need to prove that America can't dominate anymore. Once that happens, the world order changes overnight. But there is still one more step in this story. What do China, Russia, and Iran gain when America falls? And more importantly, what comes after the United States is no longer Hasson. When America steps back even slightly, others don't wait politely to fill the void. They rush in. They redraw borders. They rewrite rules. They reshape reality. If the United States can no longer guarantee global security, this is the world that follows. China writes the new rules of the Pacific. Taiwan falls. Japan and South Korea are forced to compromise. U.S. bases close or shrink not by choice but by necessity. China claims the South China Sea as sovereign territory. Shipping routes taxed or controlled. Neighbors intimidated into silence. The Pacific becomes a Chinese lake. Manufacturing already shifting completes its exodus. The global economy now depends directly on Beijing's approval. Russia reshapes Europe. Ukraine is no longer a battlefield, it's a warning. NATO fractures under pressure. Eastern Europe cuts deals with Moscow to survive. Energy flows east instead of west. The European Union loses relevance. Germany and France negotiate, not dictate. Russia has lost the Soviet Empire once. It does not intend to lose it again. Iran controls the Middle East. With U.S. forces redeployed or withdrawn, Iran's influence stretches from Tehran to the Mediterranean. Israel faces war without a guaranteed American shield. Gulf monarchies rely on China for protection. Oil becomes a political weapon again. Iran doesn't need peace. Chaos is its strategy. Chaos drives power into its hands. A world without a referee. War doesn't become less likely. It becomes easier. Cyber attacks every week. Nuclear blackmail normalized. Small countries forced to choose sides or be crushed for refusing. Freedom of navigation? Gone. Human rights? Only if they serve interests. Economic stability? A myth from the old world. When America stops enforcing order, no one else enforces anything. What the new axis gains, China gains resources and global authority. Russia gains territory and leverage. Iran gains influence and regional dominance. What does the world lose? Security, stability, a predictable future. And Americans, for the first time in generations, will face the same hard truth other nations live with daily. The world is dangerous when someone powerful is in charge. It is much more dangerous when no one is. The fall of American power is not the rise of a peaceful order. It is the rise of a more aggressive one. And that brings us to the final part of the story. Is America's collapse inevitable, or can it still stop the pattern? History has already written this story 3 times. Every major power that faced a coordinated challenge from rising rivals convinced itself of the same comforting lie. We are too strong to fall. Athens said it. Spain believed it. Japan lived it. The Soviet Union assumed it. And each one was proven wrong, not by a stronger enemy, but by their own refusal to face reality in time. That is where the United States stands right now. Not at the end of its power, but at the end of its illusions, because the danger America faces today is not simply China or Russia or Iran. It is all 3 at once pulling the world into a multipolar battlefield the U.S. is no longer prepared to command. No superpower has ever survived a 3-front challenge. None. If the United States wants to break the pattern, it must do something no empire has ever done. Rebuild before collapse, not after. Here's what that requires. Admit reality, U.S. Dominance is not guaranteed. Restore industrial capacity. Wars are won in factories before battlefields. Rebuild the Navy and ammunition stockpiles. Strengthen alliances while they still believe in U.S. promises. Focus on major threats, not global micromanagement. Prepare for sacrifice, because power always demands a price. If America pretends everything is fine, Stage 5 arrives faster. If America refuses to change, Stage 6 becomes permanent. The new axis, China, Russia, Iran, doesn't need to destroy the United States. They only need to force America to choose. Pacific or Europe? Middle East or Indo-Pacific? Allies or economy? Each choice weakens another front. Each concession accelerates decline. Each hesitation confirms the new reality. America can be challenged. America can be overwhelmed. America can lose. The fall will not look like a dramatic catastrophe. It will look like silence, no more interventions, no more ultimatums, no more leadership, just a superpower slowly stepping back in a world that grows darker with every step. The United States still has power, still has allies, still has the ability to change course. But time is not unlimited, and the axis is moving. History doesn't wait for empires to wake up. It simply moves on without them. The question that now defines the 21st century is not, can America stay number one? It is, will America fight to remain a superpower? Or remember that it once was one? The answer will decide whether this century is shaped in Washington or in Beijing, Moscow, and Tehran. The pattern is in motion. The clock is ticking. The choice is America's, and America's alone.